Well, this is muddy. I'm ending up having to do this on the phone with the washing machine going in the background. It's like the 50-second take. Okay, hey comrades, glad you're there. I wish I were there. This would be a lot easier. Like my computer has no storage. Okay, so what's happening now? We can all see, finally, everyone can see that what's happening is a siege of the entirety of humanity. And because it's the entirety of humanity, and including us, the wired billion, the high consumers, who have to be, dispensed with before the ruling class can call the enormous population of slaves that support us. I mean, we each have 5 or 6 slaves on this earth, making our lifestyle. The wired billion is a class that doesn't contribute a lot to the global lifestyle. We basically work for the luxuries for a segment of us, and for the genuine ruling class. Anyway, so you could see that there is a siege. There is a siege of the entire earth. That the markets are being closed. Resources are being locked down, shut down, refused us, and it's like an old-fashioned medieval siege. Now, I'm going to discuss the two normal, traditional fake genres of analysis, a fraudulent analysis that mimics us and poisons us, that gives an absurd version. There are 2 traditional ones. They've been elaborated. They used to be for very separate markets and very separate mini cultures, and now they're really being used together. And I'm talking about it's the system, Hegelian one, the maximally abstracting, kind of an left exaggeration within the liberal sociology, and then the other one being the protocols of the learned elders of Zion, the plot. The magical plot. Both of these are magical. Both of these give supernatural explanations for something that we can see that's not supernatural, that's political, that's class war. And so both of those like to talk about a new normal, when it's simply that, in the nice neighborhoods, the gentrified nice part of the earth, we stuck our head out the window, and here they're coming for us. Well, we've been watching this siege since 1991. And before, of course, it achieved the great successes of 1991 for the class war, the destruction of the Soviet Union and the massive plunder that was going to be necessary, that it's necessary. All of this is cumulative. This is a war, and war of position and war of maneuver. Both of those things are going on that and the ruling class is winning it. They're on the offensive. They're about to take enormous risks. But we have to understand that there are these false explanations that are poisonous. The whole purpose of them is to prevent the resurgence of a global communist movement, a worldwide movement, which should be very possible now because we're all targeted. Nobody is shielded anymore. So we're all targeted for this last enclosure, this last battle, to be absolutely dispossessed, reduced to slaves, and even to the status of livestock by the ruling class. This program is, you could tell the longest possible historical perspective, and that would be the most complete account. But we'll start with 1991 because this was a massive plunder of new resources, a huge amount of money. The ruling class procured the entirety of the wealth of a third of the earth, the most richest societies that had ever existed. In fact, the socialist and communist blocs, the countries groups, societies were massively rich. Infrastructure, resources, labor, technology, capacities, and also it's far superior, more advanced social organization for accomplishing collective tasks. So when the ruling class reconquered China and Russia, the Soviet Union, they found themselves ahead. They took it was their great leap forward. They found themselves far ahead than in the command of the resources of an entire society than they'd been able to achieve in the countries that had never had revolutions, never been reorganized. And then, even in the imperial core, where there was power was consolidating, but it took a huge leap after this reconquest of the earth, which meant also no more competition, no more massive stresses. That it was an enormous defeat of the enemy, us, the humanity. Okay, and robbery and plunder and the actual money is important. The money that flooded to Wall Street in the 90s to build the clamp around the earth that synthesized, that reunified all these functions of power, that is property, money, media, and, the capture of sociality, spectacle and meaning, and, finance and the military. The weapons and constabulary, all these things are unified in the Death Star, the enormous metal clamp around the earth that is the telecom grid, the spectacle, and its software. Okay, frustrating way to do this, I know, but I got to do it this way, 2 minutes at a time. Okay, this is like an example of what's hurting our brains. Okay, so we see it in 1991, the empire at the time, that it had a high degree of discipline, but it was about to go on a massive effort to discipline its own class, to destroy the Westphalianism, right structures, everything that we think of as the post-war settlement, the truce between humanity and the capitalist class that had been forced on the capitalist class after the Second World War by the enormous successes of communism, communist humanity organized as communists, and also there were many groups outside this, the pressure groups in powers, but they were under the hegemony of communism. And communism had worldwide ideological and moral hegemony. And the result of that was the situation in the post-war period, the Trente Glorieuses, the 30 glorious years of workers' power, where you had workers freed from the capitalists in a lot of the world, and then the ones who are left in the capitalist world had a lot of bargaining power. So the 80s, the 80s saw a phase of transnationalizing the empire, the ruling class power. The 80s saw that phase in a very risky program of finance that actually, turned out, there were problems, but it turned out successful for them. And then in the 90s, after the completion of so in the 80s, part of the siege tactic was already in play in the financial form. The second act of the third world debt crisis was the beginning of the siege tactic. But in 91, we see the unleashing of a worldwide siege that has now reached us. The new normal is the very old normal, in which we've been the abnormal. So the siege began. Obviously, they had to get control of all the resources to destroy the competing power centers, and this is why the fakes like to fictionalize the manner in which political power is produced. I'll get to that after this. But the the siege began 1991, Iraq, Yugoslavia. They're going around. They're going to destroy all the regional powers. They want to put their soldiers around all the oil. They want to make sure, and the oil is the lever, is one of the main levers. And every single one of these policies has stacked functions. That's another thing, and AI has allowed them to be even better at stacking the functions, at coordinating all the things that a policy can achieve. Fake lefts are always trying to get you like arguing over fake problems, like, which is worse, the Middle Passage or the auction block, which was worse in the gas chamber, the choking or the darkness and death, I mean, this is all part of one thing. And then, and also okay, I'll get into that in a little. Let me finish this part about the siege. The siege in 1991. The empire is now free of the powerful communists. That is a humanity with its own nukes, its air forces, powers, capacities comparable to, and given the social, moral, cultural realities superior to the capitalist ruling class. That ruling class is doomed. Appears to be, just as they appeared to be in the 19th century, before air power created a possibility of, a real asymmetry. And then because of the Bolsheviks, the humanity developed air power alongside humanity's enemy, the proprietors, the owners, the overlords. So that there was this. I think also, just a little aside here, I think it's helpful, and some bad thinkers who, the postmoderns tend to take a little bit of truth and then wildly exaggerate it into bullshit and to absurdum. But one of the things that Gilles Deleuze did was help people shake a certain reifications that have settled in even worse in the screen, with the screen damage. By making you think of everything as a process. That's really important, and also trying to see things not always from the same angle as liberal the Robinsonites. So it's good to think of capital, instead of trying to describe capital as a pure emanation of power. Now it's become synonymous for a lot of young people with power itself or property itself, but capital as certain limitations, conditions in which the ruling class power is operated, certain a confinement of power, not so much both limitations and capacities, but that it's a structure of power that was historically produced, and this is why Marx made such a point of explaining how capital, is produced, so that this capital relation is produced by the class struggle and feudalism. And that was a struggle between classes that are just trying to reproduce themselves. And now, I heard someone say, try to think of capital as limitations in which the ruling class operates that they're trying to get out of, and now they're out of. The commanding heights of the economy are no longer within the imperatives, and haven't been for a while. And I'll explain why in a second. So, okay, to think of it, somebody said the other day, it was just so stupid, sort of like, and you hear people say this, like, why would the empire bother with conquering Iraq? They're already so rich. Why would they bother with Haiti? It's like a fly. Why would they, and then why would Jeff Bezos want anything more? Isn't he rich enough? Not understanding at all the very profound misunderstanding of what exploitation is, what wealth is. It would be like saying, well, why in Supermax prisons don't they let the prisoners have their own, machine guns? Why do they have to have all of them? Don't they have enough? They not understanding it's a relation. It's that, it's has to be maintained, you know, it's just like a shark. Okay, so, and now the ruling class sees in its sights, after it's made taken enormous risks, and sees in its sights what they think is the possibility to end the class war by winning it, by subduing and subjecting humanity forever, somehow dispossessing. But the dispossession is, a lot of it is notional, is cultural, is legal, etc. So not that that's a cure, but they want to automate, to get more in their own hands, you know, the repressive apparatus, because their problem has always been, you know, that in order to exert their, and this is true of prior overlord classes as well, that in order to exert their control, they have to ultimately rely on violence carried out by goons, and the goons get very powerful and might choose to be the emperors themselves. And this is what the ruling class, you know, there was an article in like the Atlantic or something where some intellectual, now I forgot who it was invited to talk to some billionaires about how they would keep control after what they called the event, which they pretended to believe was something they couldn't anticipate, like an asteroid hitting the Earth or some disaster movie premise that was covering up for them, asking him, you know, if they want to blow up the money, which is what's on the agenda now, if they want to do that, how are they going to keep their power? Because ultimately it's just claims. They, you know, the ruling class is fake, you know, Whitney Webb and Jacobin Magazine and Max Blumenthal and all these frauds are always implying that the ruling class has special supernatural powers of its own. But we know they don't. They know they don't. They know they'd have to maintain their power after blowing up their claims that this is a real, that they can't solve this problem yet. You know, they're dreaming of putting, they're dreaming of how they could, you know, with all the technology is bent toward solving this problem somehow for them. But and also, you notice that technology is not really labor saving. Robots are not labor saving because robots are hard to make. You know, you got to get the metal out of the earth. It's a lot of work, and they have to be maintained. But what they do that isn't labor saving is labor disempowering. You know, the whole point of them is to move the power away, to separate the people who produce their power, because political power is socially produced. It's all of us creating powers, capacities, and funneling them towards certain individuals and classes and institutions. And so the technology, the way the digital technology, the way it's developing is to separate the people who produce the power from the results, from the things they create, so that we can't reorganize it, you know, as was done in, you know, from the early 20th century forward by humanity it looked like we would win. Okay, I lost my place a little. I'm going to pause for a second. Okay, so 1991 through, by then, okay, the counter-revolution got underway, you know, very, very seriously. Well, in China in the late 70s, revisionism even earlier in the Soviet Union, the split was a complete disaster. So the counter-revolution, but even so, the people power was so strong that it wasn't like barreling along. But in the 80s, they had their success with their fundamental, with you know, unleashed violence of just unimaginable toward, you know, toward the third world, toward the revolutionary populations of the global south, violence of, you know, degrees of depravity that was also that had new capacities for worldwide terror, you know, which is media. And then and the financial innovations, and the prerequisites for those financial innovations are computing power is a big factor. There are a lot of things, and it deserves its own little lecture. But let's assume that we all understand that through the 80s, a couple things happened simply with financial power and innovation backed by imperial violence that, allowed for the success of cunning, a cunning, violent subversion program, the violent subversion of the that separated humanity finally from the massive powers that they had created in the socialist and communist states. That it was a huge and sudden loss. And then we're in 1991. And then the empire goes on the reconquest of the earth, and they go around, and so they have to get the natural resources, they have to get the pipelines, they have to get what was the non-aligned, like the whole earth was under this hegemony of a kind of people power in a very general sense. That has to all be reversed, and all the institutions that were created, like that represented the truths, the achievements of the truths of the ruling class and the working class worldwide, which was the UN, et cetera, and all those organizations, the Council of Europe, and then so you get instead the ruling class cartel of the European Union, and all these things are the empire leads the assault on. And at the same time, within their own class, they're carrying out some disciplining. And there's a decade of this that goes to 9/11, when there's another huge leap. A lot is achieved in the 90s against the post-war settlement, taking apart the post-war settlement. And in the 90s, and also laying the groundwork. They don't have the streaming video and stuff yet. They don't, but laying the groundwork for the spectacle clamp, which is going to synthesize very effectively and centralize concretely, physically, technologically, these different stages, these different fields of play, these different fields of struggle, government, finance, military, social, and create a ersatz sociality, which is a big, that braids all these things together. But so in the 90s, that's a period that the fake critiques also want to really misrepresent what happened there. They tend to want to describe losses as victories and subjection as multipolarity. They concentrate on confusing what was achieved in the 90s to allow for another great leap forward after 9/11 is a big objective. Okay, so disciplining, centralizing the ruling class power for the reconquest of the earth, and not capitalism. Nothing was restored to the status quo ante in the 90s. The exact opposite. Well, first I'll explain. You just mentioned that through the 90s you see the ruling class creating transnational discipline, things like transforming vestiges of separate networks, the French imperial control and relations in Rwanda, et cetera, raising the political earth in every African country, because the oil there, doing all kinds of cleanup, centralizing, and mastering the ruling class structure that had been produced by history. It wasn't, nobody had designed it. And now there was a sort of, the vanguard comes to the fore to really modify it in ways that will maximize the ability of the ruling class to act in the class war, globally in the class war. So the control of the oil, and it is the oil price, it's controlling the price, and oil is really the, currency. It's the closest. There's no labor. There's no labor futures on the human labor on the stock market like pork bellies. If there were, the closest thing was sort of oil, because the oil goes into everything that reproduces labor power. And and that would also be very close to the basket of the majors if it existed, so it's notionally there. But so controlling the oil price, but also controlling the physical oil, the spigots, being able to turn it off, was a major factor in the construction of ruling class discipline that would coordinate the Chinese ruling class with the imperial U.S. ruling class. That's now, now it's fully integrated, but it wasn't when this began. It had to be integrated. It was integrated on the terms of an agenda that was being run by an Intel-created new set of overlords who had very little to do with capitalism. I mean, we're talking about the Silicon Valley over empires that were created by Intel. They're not, they're not even, these companies they're not capitalist companies. They weren't really profitable. Their valuations come from speculation into a slave future where fictitious capital could be mined from infinitely into the future to be realized in the present as capital. Now, what does that mean? Like we talk about the stock market and stuff, and it's very important. And our comrade Tom Moore, who did that wonderful takedown of VG, who's such an asshole, and I want to debate anyone who wants to defend that guy. But he's now started to write a middle-length piece about imperialism today, where he goes through all of our texts, our guiding texts, Capital and Lenin, and finds what they're really saying, and that there is a lot of guidance in there. A lot of people are afraid that if you start talking about the transformation out of capitalism, not into communism, into something else, being led by the ruling class, that we're going to lose Marx, that we're going to lose our roadmap, and that's not true. It's only Marx that can explain only the method of Marx, but also his real observations. He saw it happening. He saw it in embryo. That was his great gift. And so when that essay comes out, everyone's going to have to go back and read volume 3, sections that we know, actually, we could tell are Marx himself, even though from notes, because he has this style that we all recognize, right? That's different from Engels' style. Okay, so what does this mean? So the super billionaires of Silicon Valley, who are in the driver's seat now, they're the vanguard. Their forces are in the vanguard. Individually, we're never going to know. We know Bill Gates is very important. It's not worth speculating too much about them personally, a little bit. Because obviously he's just been disciplined. Somebody took half his money away. The most personally powerful person on the planet right now is President Xi, who kicked off this stage of the global siege, the attack on the wired billion, the lockdowns, etc., the worldwide plague story. But it's the thing is, it's a new class interest. It's a new powers linked to the telecom grid, which is military, financial, media, intellectual, consciousness itself, and sociality, communications, all that tied together. Things that had been separated, are being, and it's a little bit useful, again, Deleuze and his reterritorialization. I don't really like his analysis, but that's a good little heuristic vision of something that we know from Marx, in other words. But now we have that reterritorialization of all these territorialization of all these forms of power that have been concentrated in a process of deterritorialization, which is what financialization is, right? It's taking everything, turning it into, funneling its value into abstract forms, claims, and things that are just social, whizzing them around in an apparently self-functioning market that's actually rigged in order to steal them. A rigged casino. There's a way to shake property free of the masses and steal it. So, and now there's a reterritorialization of all power, the ability to create markers, claims, everything in a caste, a new caste of the overlords, the oligarchy that is concretized by its control of this of digitality, of the Death Star that now controls everything. Everything is streamed through it. I mean, you can see this on every level of every detail, like how belonging to NATO means that you can't launch your own nukes, that you can't fly your own planes, that all these are being controlled by increasingly centralized digital. That's this metal cage, that metal electronic cage of everything. Okay, so this reterritorialization. I'm getting to next one. So it has transformed this has transformed capitalism in small ways. The inability of anyone, nobody has accumulated capital that you could conceivably make money with, investing in the exploitation of labor to sell commodities in markets, that the rate of profit had a tendency to fall, and that it actually did fall. But it's not just that. It was even Marx was noticing, that the whole the capital was being socialized, and finance was mastering, the capitalists, someone investing. They're not really, that it seems to be an actual social function. This deserves a longer discussion, or to prove it. But I'm going to just assume that we all understand that, finance is socialized, that, things are held in common by the ruling class in their corporations, etc., and centralized. The control, even of diversely owned property, is centralized. But capital itself is sort of expanding, literally expanding, that there's way too much capital because the ruling class got capacities through the empire to stop the financial crashes from speculation, to stop capital being destroyed. Now, there's only fake crashes now, so that there's literally too much for, it's not worth anything. That's why you can't get any interest. Or it's interest could be charged to the poor. Only that's force stepping in, not the actual value of capital. So it's expanding. There's way too much, but it's expanding to an infinite thing. And this is not this. I want to distinguish this from the postmodern mediologist idea that you can't calculate values anymore, but labor values. But that the issue is that the ruling class title is political. What something is worth, what a share of a business is worth, doesn't depend on whether it's likely that tomorrow the workers are going to come to work and let you exploit them. If you're in a situation, as happened across the world in the 70s, where that's not so likely, then that's reflected in financial value. That's reflected in the relationship, how between different kinds of property. So, meaning, it's like if you own a slave, quite simply, if you own a slave, let's say you owned a slave you're selling this slave, but you don't own that slave's children. That's not your title, let's say, in this society. And you don't have any way to enforce your ownership of the child. That slave is going to be worth less than if you own that slave forever and all their children. And it would be the same as owning a 100-year lease on an apartment in central London or a freehold, this kind of thing. But in the political situation after 1991 and the destruction, the reconquest of the earth, all these values changed, not only in relationship to each other, but in relationship to a human life, to each of us, because of the extension of the title notionally toward forever, toward the entire duration of the human species. You know, in the 1970s, I mean, I'm saying that this shows up in finance, that the difference between what an investment in, you know, some kind of extraction of some kind of something that depends on the extraction of metals in the South America, where the likelihood of being actually able to extract them, you know, cheaply, because you have slave labor or very, very cheap labor, is low, and a situation where it's certain, you know. So this is what happened with the stock market, with these valuations of the insane valuations of the new media empires before they had any profit, while they were hemorrhaging money. They're still extremely profitable shares. The valuations come from, you know, the increased control of existing income streams, including the public treasuries. This you know, the de-democratization of the rich countries is very important, because it meant that the ruling class could simply plunder the treasury as its own backstop. But it's not just that. It's that the actual projected value of these things is increasing infinitely, because humanity doesn't look like it's ever going to free itself. You're going to be exploited forever, all the children forever, and more exploited. And it's like there's an infinite, and this is why the masking, I think, is so important to this stage of the program, because it goes ideologically even to the understanding of what value is, and, you know, labor, power, but also what a human being is. They're attacking a consensus that goes back to Renaissance humanism, you know, about what we are. The truth is, we're an organic as Marx taught us, as Marx taught us, and as Marxists continue to teach us, the human being is an organic process that metabolizes things outside us, you know, that there's no real separation. You can't. So that, you know, an adequate source of water and air going in and out of our lungs is as much a part, even more a part of what a human individual is than your own legs, right? You can lose your legs, but you can't lose the air going in and out. That's you. And so now there's an attack. One of the things, the spectacle, and this is going to ideology on the deepest level, that is realizing this ideology isn't coming from nowhere. It's not just fantasy. It's coming from the situation, that the capacities that the ruling class now has over us. That's what this ideology is reflecting. This ideology is transforming humanity, shrinking the material content of what a human is to nothing, to a mere name, to a check on it, you know, so that, you know, you can stop someone breathing without being thought to be assaulting them. You can enclose them in a cage, whereas Marx would understand that this was actual, you know, this was a dismemberment of a human being, of an individual. Now it's seen as the dispossession is such that it's happening on the deepest ideological, philosophical level. Wait, so, okay, now, so I hope this is a picture. There's so much more to say, but I want to move here to shift here to talk about the fake discourses that are being mobilized to prevent communist, the revival of communist revolutionary movement, which should be worldwide now and should be fairly easy to do because we're all under attack. We're all being absolutely going to be targeted for absolute dispossession, reduction, a separate species. There's also, there's all this bullshit dreaming of transhumanism that we're going to actually be turned into house elves. They know they can't do it, but they might say to you, oh, we have to put an implant in your brain so that you can live in a virtual paradise while the planet can only have you in this little sewer pipe, but you can have this wonderful imaginary life. And that's just a story. They want to put an implant in your brain so they can shut you off, so they can kill you and torture you, because those capacities they have. Other capacities, kind of sci-fi capacities are developing, like things that'll tend to be able to expand longevity. Now, we can all have that, but the ruling class obviously they want to have the longevity, and the slaves, one of the techniques of enslavement is going to be to sterilize us, to take reproduction out of our hands with artificial wombs, and to have us short circuit, at 40 or whatever. Anyway, so all this stuff is kind of obvious now, but we should realize that propaganda is not done in a straightforward way anymore. It's only done in these indirect ways. So we always have a lot of fake lefts and fake critiques, and then also the enemy, when the few times it appears to be announcing itself and its own program straightforwardly, as they used to do. Fascists used to say pretty much what they wanted. People argued for monarchy. They argued for inequality. They did all this stuff. Now they don't do that. They only do it in the form of trolling, like the Hariri guy or Nick Land or people like that, who only, they say things that are absurd. They're absurd provocations in order to set up, to cue their partners, the fake lefts, the fake critiques that focus on them. And, so I've just explained this whole thing that's been going on for the siege, since 1991. And, I didn't even mention anything, but you all know, like, the massive amount of material, historical, military, social, financial aggressions that have taken place. The praxis of the ruling class is material, ruthless, and real and political. And you get a fake, and the LaRouches will tell you, no. What's actually happening is people are meeting at Davos and plotting. And simply by meeting there, some mysterious thing is happening behind all this, under all this, that's actually the opposite of, that all this that we see, the attack on Iraq, all that stuff is the sort of virtuous world of the stewards of the human species, the natural stewards. And then there's this secret group who is somehow controlling everything simply by having a conference in Switzerland. And then who knows what. So that's the Protocol Z version. Now, both the protocols and It's the System. Now, It's the System, both of these actually derive from the contemporary versions that we're dealing with, were re-energized. These are old forms of professionalized stupidity. But the It's the System one is geared toward, it used to be for the more educated people, posher, liberal elites. It was for the left in those circles, operating in those circles in the big cities, universities, elite universities and stuff. But they're both of them are magical, and both of them are derived. The contemporary reinvigorations come from the work of Carl Schmitt, but they derive from different perspectives on Schmitt and different texts. So it's the system. You hear it in trot circles. It's